Make a list of iconic fictional characters. Go ahead, I'll wait. Got it? I bet you have a great list. You want to hear mine? My list includes characters who were introduced in the 1930s, the 40s, and the 60s. Specifically, Wonder Woman, Black Panther, Batman, and Spider-Man. That's right, I love reading comics. Really, any comic will do. Comic book characters are all over the place right now. You'd have to live under a rock without knowing just a few names. But why read comic books? I mean, sure, there are those iconic characters I mentioned earlier, but there's millions others. Why read their stories? I'm going to show you that regardless if you don't read comics at all, you dabble in them, or you're thinking about starting, that the comic book is a great medium for storytelling. First of all, there is a comic for everyone. Sure, there are the superhero comics where you see them battle every issue, but there's also more than that. One of the most prolific writers today, Ed Brubaker, writes stories of crime from just everyday people. His collaborator, Sean Phillips, draws beautiful scenes that bring the reader into the story. Not only that, there's horror stories. Maybe you've seen Netflix's series Lock and Key. Did you know that that series was based off of a comic? It's written by Stephen King's son, Joe Hill, and his collaborator, artist Gabriel Rodriguez. In my opinion, their series, much better than the Netflix series. There's also science fiction, and that's the most in-demand genre. I love the stories that are about time travel and multi-dimensions and dystopian futures and space travel. Brian K. Vaughan writes wonderful stories like Saga and Why the Last Man and Paper Girls. But again, there's so much more. We could go on for days just talking about the various genres. Maybe you just like the relationships between people and the conflicts that arise. There's that too. There's adaptations of novels, historical events, wars, and even memoirs. There are stories for children, for teens, and adults. But what's even better than what I just showed you was that everyone can see themselves in a comic. There are stories of every race, gender identity, and sexual orientation. And not just you and I, but superheroes too. Some of the most popular superheroes are those of minorities. There's Miss Marvel, who's Pakistani American, Storm, who's African American. There's also John Proudstar, who's Native American, Silk, Korean American, and Miles Morales, Spider-Man, who's half Puerto Rican. There's queer characters like Iceman and America Chavez, Harley Quinn and John Constantine. Famously, the popular characters from the X-Men have widely been regarded as metaphors for marginalized people. Their tagline is, "Protect mankind, even those who fear and hate them." Author Chris Claremont wrote decades worth of stories of these characters protecting mankind, even those who fear and hate them. But clearly comics are much more than the stories. It's also about the art. The art is what brings some readers in. You get an artist who will convey a clear facial expression, then the reader knows exactly what that character is feeling. Add character traits. The artist puts in the character traits in the hair and in the clothing and in the makeup and even the accessories they're bringing with them. You get a combination of that character trait with the facial expression, you know everything you need to know about that character. What's also really fun are the superhero comics. When an artist can convey those action scenes in a clear and concise way. The hero throwing that punch or that kick or the jump and the villain's reaction to that. If you get a clear, concise look at that action through various angles and point of views, you combine that with the character traits and the facial expression, that is a golden sell. What I also really like is that the artist will throw in Easter eggs. They'll sometimes put pop culture references on clothing. They'll name buildings after other creators. And if you like canon, you know, those events in the past leading to the present, if you like that, they'll sometimes throw in references to past events in the background. It's so much fun. But just like people who read novels have their book clubs, comic book readers also have their own communities. The nice thing about these communities is that everyone knows what you're talking about. They all have the same terminology. Let me give you an example. I had a student who was an avid comic reader, and he knew I read comics too. And he asked me on a particular lesson, how am I doing? And rate me in Robins. Well, you didn't have to go any further. I knew exactly what he was talking about. I knew Dick Grayson was the best Robin, and Damian was the worst. He's got some bad stories. He's a bad guy. Then, beyond that, on these communities, they help each other. You got a story, you got a question about canon, there's someone there who can help you. If you want a recommendation, you're definitely going to get it. Oh, by the way, my student, he was a Jason Todd Robin. But where do you begin? Let's say you want to start reading comics. Where do you even begin? Well, first you got to locate the comics. Google your local comic book shop. Google digital sources. Go to your local public library. Then if you want to read superhero comics, decide what character you want to explore. Start with the first issue of the current author's run. Don't go to the first appearance. Let's say you want to explore Batman. Well, Batman was introduced in Detective Comics number 27 in 1939. That's almost 80 years worth of the detective comic title. Not to mention the Batman title. Oh, and there's all these other smaller titles that have come and gone. That's a lot of Batman stories. And they don't always connect. So locate the current author of the main title. That's James Tynion IV. And he started his run on Batman number 86 in the year 2020. Well, let's say you don't want to read about superhero comics. Maybe there's a different genre you want to read. Just Google that. You'll get recommendations. I guarantee you'll find something you like. You know, often comics have been looked at as a childish medium. You know, and they're not far from being wrong. You know, the popular titles have to be geared towards many ages. And therefore, they are somewhat childish. But there's so much that's not. Just like there's many different readers for novels, there's many different readers for comics. Again, just take a look. I guarantee you'll find something you like. Thank you, and just like legendary comic writer Stan Lee always said, Excelsior.